Please subscribe to hear more Cryptid Tales. If you like the story you heard, give us a thumbs up and feel free to leave us a comment. If you'd like to hear your own cryptid encounter on Cryptid Tales, send us an email at cryptidtalesmail@gmail.com.
I was 9 the first time I saw it. It was raining. I was playing with G.I. Joes on the front porch of my grandma's house. It was one of those summer rains, the kind that can last all afternoon and into the evening. I had been cooped up in the house all day, and while the porch had a floor and a roof, it was still technically outside. I could hear the sound of the TV through the screen door. Grandma said she liked the smell of the rain, but I think she liked having an eye on me even more, even if I was just on the porch. But for some reason, I had the feeling come over me that she wasn't the only one keeping an eye on me. Something else was watching me. I could just feel it. I looked down towards the end of the porch, the end that faced the woods next to Grandma's house, and the direction the feeling was coming from. At first, I didn't see anything. The rain made things look almost fuzzy. But then it moved, right there next to the big tree Grandma would get her pecans from to make her pies. I stood up to get a better look, and it stopped behind the tree. I remember walking down to the end of the porch to try and get a better look. At first, I thought it was gone, but then I could see it start to very slowly peek around from behind the tree. I could see almost half of its face now. It looked like a naked man covered in dirty, wet hair, standing behind the tree. The hair was light, almost white if it had been clean, and the thing's skin was just as pale. But the eyes. Those eyes still haunt me. They were deep and dark like two polished black stones. A clap of thunder sounded off and made me jump. By the time my heart hit the next beat, the white thing had taken off into the woods, running and leaping as it went. By the time I craned my head around the corner of the porch to see it, it was all but vanished into the shadows of the trees. I ran inside, scooping up my G.I. Joes as I went and blasting through the screen door. Dad, there's a white thing outside. Come look. I tugged on his arm to no avail and turned my attention to Grandma. I'll never forget the look she had on her face. It seemed to be frozen in thought for a moment, her eyes staring into her thoughts and her mouth hanging slightly open. Then she suddenly snapped out of it and lifted herself out of her chair, waddling into the kitchen where my mother was. Nobody seemed to be interested in the terrifying white thing that was outside in Grandma's woods, but I always wondered by that look she had if Grandma knew exactly what I was talking about. If she did, she never said anything about it, and like most things in childhood, I buried it in my memories and went on with growing up. Grandma passed on, taking whatever secret she had of the white thing with her. Mom got the house, and even though we didn't need it, she couldn't bring herself to sell her mother's property. So it just sat there like a time capsule as the years passed by. I grew up, graduated, got a job, met a girl, got married, and had a kid of my own. Dad left Mom between the graduated and got a job part, and moved out of state with a lady named Barbara. Before I knew it, Mom had gray hair and was trying to teach my son how to say Grandma. I convinced her that it was time to sell the property Grandma had left her. She had no desire to live out there by herself, and I certainly didn't want her to. The only time I had been back to Grandma's house was for her funeral, but Mom had made the trip off and on, packing up a little bit of stuff here and there, bringing it back to town or donating things she didn't want. When we pulled up to the property, it was like pulling up to a haunted house. Grandma's house was barely recognizable with the yard and brush grown up around it and the paint peeling off like a sunburn. It's true what they say that an empty house dies, and Grandma's house looked like it was on its deathbed. I pulled open the old rusted screen door and unlocked the front door. It was like walking into a vacuum of stale air, but to my surprise, the inside was just like I had remembered it. I could still hear the sound of Grandma's old tube television and smell those pies baking in the oven. That night I couldn't get comfortable though. The mattress was too hard, it was hot in the house, but everyone else was sound asleep. Somewhere along the path of life, I had picked up the nasty habit of smoking. I thought maybe that would relax me a bit, so I grabbed my lighter and went out on the front porch for a smoke. The sound of the lighter flicking was almost deafening compared to the quiet of the country at night. There was a bright full moon, and I could see all the way across the field on the other side of the road to the old hay barn. I remember as a kid how it looked like a giant face with a gaping mouth. Now the old face was covered in a beard of ivy and weeds. A few minutes later, I snubbed out my cigarette in the old planter at the base of the porch steps. As I stepped back up on the porch, a limb snapped in the tree line next to the house. It almost sounded like a firecracker as the sound rippled through the night. I chuckled at myself for being startled by the sound. It was just a noise. I reached for the handle on the screen door to go back inside, but something froze my steps. A whistle. Just a single-tone whistle. Had I really heard that? I took a few steps back and looked towards the woods. I was pretty certain the whistle came from that direction. Was it a bird? Birds don't call at night, my brain answered back. I halfway doubted myself. I was by no means any sort of expert on birds or what they do, or... There it was again. Another whistle. I walked down to the end of the porch and peered off towards the woods. I could see beams of moonlight scattering between the trees, but whatever was whistling remained hidden from view. I stood there for a minute, staring into the dark, intently waiting for this mystery bird to reveal itself. Just as I had given up hope and turned around to walk back inside, another pop of a snapping tree limb held me in place. Was someone toying with me? Who would be out in the woods in the middle of the night on private property? I mean, I know we hadn't been around the place much, and anyone from the area would surely know the place was vacant, but there were no trespassing signs clearly visible along the road. There it was, the whistle again. This time clear and distinct. It came from right over there, right at the edge of the tree line, right behind the big pecan tree. I moved my head around on my neck, leaning left and then right, trying to see who or what was behind the tree. I know right now you're probably thinking, the white thing, don't you remember the white thing? But I didn't. I had completely forgotten about it, like we do when we grow up. Things that really had importance to us as children fade away as we get older, and we realize monsters don't exist. There wasn't one under the bed, and there wasn't one in the woods at Grandma's house. But then the monster slowly peeked around from behind the tree with those cold black eyes and that long, dirty white hair. It leaned out from behind the big tree Grandma would get her pecans from to make her pies, just like it did on that rainy summer day. I felt like I was 9 years old all over again, standing there at the end of the porch with those dark, black, polished stone eyes looking right back at me. The thing looked like a naked old man covered in dirty, stringy hair. It was the same face, the same white thing, but like me, it had gotten older. I wanted to run inside, but this time there was no clap of thunder, and this time the white thing wasn't running off into the woods. I stood there trying to process what was happening in my adult mind. You could tell it was trying to do the same thing. Why had it whistled? Why did it get my attention? Did it want me to see it? Did this thing remember me? It all seemed so crazy, but at the same time, it was all so vividly real. The white thing very slowly stepped out from behind the tree, revealing its entire body. It wasn't the slightest bit afraid and seemed not to care one bit that I could see it. A chill ran up my spine and I started to shiver a bit. The thing looked like a human, for the most part, but different at the same time. The shoulders were bulky and muscular, but the rest of the body was more lean, giving it an appearance like it was almost hunched over. The arms were long, and I could see the fingertips curl towards the tops of the knees. The entire body was covered in that dirty white hair, except the nose and under the eyes. The hair on its head was much longer, just as you would expect to see on a human, and seemed to grow right into the beard that laid flat against its chest. I could tell it was old, and it certainly looked like something that had lived its entire life in the wild. We both stood there in our morbid staring contest, studying the other one the best we could from that distance. A smell, better described as a putrid stench, started climbing into my nostrils. I guess I was breathing after all, but now the foul smell of the creature clung to the back of my throat and made me want to heave. But I didn't move. I was too afraid. The thin lips on the creature's wrinkled face started to peel back, revealing large, stain-covered block teeth. On one side, a large canine tooth glistened, but on the opposite side was an empty void where the other one used to be. The look on its face reminded me of one of those old wind-up toys where the monkey smacks the cymbals together. Through its parted lips and bared teeth, the white thing started to make this clicking noise that slowly grew into this deep, thumping growl. It almost seemed too loud and too powerful for this old creature to make, even though it was at least a foot taller and a foot wider than I was. I felt a fluttering in my ears as the growl reverberated in my own chest. Without warning, the growl stopped and the white thing bent down like it was ducking under something, never taking its eyes off me. It opened its mouth wide and pushed out a loud huff through its clenched teeth. A fine mist of its saliva floated into the moonlit air. For a moment, I thought it was going to bound towards me, like I had watched it do that rainy day when it ran off into the forest. But it didn't. With one movement, it seemed to pivot and dive back towards the trees, hitting the ground with clenched fists. The thing that once looked so human now looked animal as it leapt off into the forest on all fours. My wife's voice behind me on the porch snapped me out of my state of shock. I spun around, almost surprised to see her standing there. It's like I had forgotten where I even was for a moment. "Did you..." I looked back towards the now still and quiet woods. "Did you see it?" Before she even said it, I could clearly tell she hadn't seen anything. There was no look of confusion or fear or disbelief on her face. All emotions that were tumbling through my own head. I told her I was just on my way back in, but took one last look towards the trees before walking inside. I never told my wife about the white thing, but after the property was sold, I did talk to my mom about it. I guess I was hoping she would have some answers or would give me a sigh and reluctantly tell me how she had seen it when she lived there, but she didn't. Every now and then, when I'm laying there in bed waiting to fall asleep, I can still see it peeking around the tree at me, staring at me with those cold black eyes.